You're enjoying Racing World. It's brought to you by Perspective Group. It's your global motorsport podcast show brought to you in conjunction with Race Control Magazine.
Driver movements. IndyCar's final two races of the year. Liam Lawson in an F1 car at Spa and on the podium in F2. It's Racing World for the 1st of September 2022. Well, there's nowhere better to start the show this week than Liam Lawson making his debut in Formula 1 FP1 practice at Spa last week in a credible position. Sure, it was towards the back of the field, but the bottom line fact is he did probably the minimum number of laps. He only did about 14 laps and in mixed weather conditions as well. So when he got to run the soft rubber, really the weather didn't play the game. And it's such a long lap at Spa that, you know, that's just the way the cookie rolls. But he did exactly what he was told to do and delivered the car back straight and ready to go for Pierre Gasly. So fine job by Liam Lawson. And then he backed it up with a win in the sprint race in F2 and then a podium position, a P3 in the feature race for F2 as well. So overall great weekend for Liam Lawson. And one thing you'd have to say, and it's a driver thing all the way through, confidence brings confidence. And right now his confidence has got to be high. What does it mean for the future? It's an unknown fact because there are so many variables right now. We're about to discuss driver movements, but for Liam Lawson, he's done everything he can possibly do. A lot of these things now become out of his hands, but what a great performance from him last weekend, and here's for more. So to the driver market and what we know now that we didn't know last week. Daniel Ricciardo gone from McLaren, gone a year early. A great shame really, but in many ways became a victim to how this whole thing is playing itself out this year. Yes, he'll walk away with a chunk of change, that's for sure, but he may not end up with a drive. So what are Danny Ric's options right now? Alpine, maybe. But then the French manufacturers got to consider whether or not they want to take him back, because French being French, they're still not that happy about how he left the first time round. So there's got to be a bit of smoothing of the ways there, but that's an option. Haas, yes, that's an option, but does Danny Ric really want to go there? I don't think so. Williams, that's an option as well, because Latifi's seat is probably up for grabs. Would he want to go there? Probably not. Takes a year off. He's been paid for a year. Is that a good thing to do? Many drivers have taken a year's sabbatical. We can list quite a few of them. I don't think so myself. I think if you're going to do it, you've got to try and stay in the game, so time will tell. Then there's talk of whether he would stay with McLaren and go to a Formula E ride. Definitely not. The bridges are burnt now at McLaren. It ain't going to go any further. That's done and dusted, that's for sure. And then the other part of it is IndyCar, and this keeps coming up. But Danny Ric has said time and time again he's not really interested in IndyCar, and I was vocal about it in last week's show, saying that maybe it's not the place for drivers that have lost seats in Formula 1 to suddenly go, oh well, I'm going to go to IndyCar. Forgetting Romain Grosjean, of course, at this stage, because I think he's worthy of being there, and Danny Ric would be too. So a scenario that was rumoured that sort of crossed my path last week was maybe he could go to Ganassi. Jimmie Johnson does the oval races and Danny Ric does the road course and permanent course races for the year. Interesting combination, could work. Will it happen? I don't really think so, but it's a nice one to contemplate for a while, and if it does, well, you heard it here first. Right, moving on to the next driver in the equation, and this one's come back up, and it's Colton Herta. Now, why has that come back up? Because suddenly AlphaTauri are saying that they would be interested in Herta, which is on the Red Bull radar. So it's not only a McLaren deal possibly for Herta, but it could also be a Red Bull / AlphaTauri deal. What does that require? It requires one of the two drivers leaving for a start. It also means that Gasly needs to get clearance to do that, but he is a free agent. And Tsunoda could go, of course, so we're not just saying that it's Gasly that's going to go from AlphaTauri. He then needs to get cleared from his Andretti Autosport contract, which is through until the end of season 2023. However, we've learnt that there is an F1 clause in there, so should an F1 gig come along, Colton is cleared to go. So watch that space. It may not only be McLaren that's chasing the services of Colton Herta. We touched on it quickly there. Gasly, yes, he's a free agent. Will he go to Alpine? Because that seems to be where he may go. If he does, there's no place for Danny Ric there. Time will tell on that one. Is that a good move for Gasly? Yes, it might be. It might be time to move on from that. He's in the ability to be able to do that, or will he stay where he is? House of Cards will change the scenario depending on how that plays out. Yuki Tsunoda, also at AlphaTauri. He has got some issues at the moment for sure. and he's at a contract renewal phase as well, so he could be the one to go. If he does, where does he go? I really don't know with Yuki. We've seen him down here in New Zealand in Toyota Racing Series. You can only hope that he keeps the AlphaTauri drive, because I can't see another seat for him in F1. Liam Lawson, obviously we've talked about. Would that create holes for Liam Lawson? It just may well. If not, it'd get him a reserve driver role for sure. So let's just wait and see, and fingers crossed for Liam Lawson on that one. Then we get to some interesting ones. Alex Palau's come back up. Still not resolved with what he's doing with Chip Ganassi Racing this year. And Zach Brown stated the other day that he was interested in Alex Palau's services not only for IndyCar but also for F1, and Alex would have enough super license points, which Colton Herta doesn't have, but there's some manipulation that can be done based on the 2 years of COVID, so Herta would probably get in anyway. So Palau, we've tended to ignore this, the fact that maybe he was only destined for the McLaren IndyCar seat, but Zach Brown mentioned his name in the same sentence as F1. So let's wait and see. That has to play itself out, and that needs to be done within the next few weeks once the IndyCar season's over. Everyone's agreed on that, and that will then change how things line up in IndyCar in 2023. David Malukas, another one that's on the radar right now. Now, will he stay with Dale Coyne Racing? I'd like to think so. I feel sorry for Dale Coyne that he grooms these drivers and then they disappear on him, but that's the nature of the game when you're a team at that level. Where would he go? Depending where those house of cards fall, I've said it before, I'm picking that maybe he could be the next hot thing at Chip Ganassi Racing, so let's just wait and see. I'm not saying that that's a deal, I'm just saying that that's where I'd go. If I was Chipper and I was on my shopping list, I'd be looking at him. Jimmie Johnson, also at Chip Ganassi Racing, not confirmed for 2023, and again I think that this is all hinging around what happens with the Alex Palau situation, and then things will just transpire as a result of that. Will Jimmy be in for a whole season, a part season? I'd like to think that he'd come back for a whole season, but again, things have to happen and play themselves out to enable all of that to happen. Then while we're at it, Mick Schumacher this week been released from Haas and also released from his Ferrari Academy undergraduate program with Ferrari, so he's now effectively a free agent. Where does that leave Mick? Well, maybe he's a sitter for the Alpine seat. Esteban Ocon has clearly said multiple times that he'd love to have Mick Schumacher there, so maybe there's some French influence there. If not, then next season, assuming Nico Hülkenberg is not driving as well, will be the first season in years that a German hasn't been present on the Formula One grid. So I'd like to see Mick maybe pick up that Alpine seat. I know it changes a lot of the equations, but it'd be a great thing. What does that do for Haas? Well, the big rumour at the moment is that Antonio Giovinazzi will be back after his year off, or he's been a Haas reserve driver as well, alongside Fittipaldi. But Giovinazzi is rumoured to be in there, and don't forget, of course, that's got Ferrari connections to it, and it's a Ferrari in the back of the Haas. So that's probably going to play itself out, and Kevin Magnussen up for a renewal on his deal as well. The rest of the Formula One grid, well, what can we say? If you look at Williams, Albon is signed, Latifi's got a question mark over him. Alpha, let's just wait and see how that all plays itself out. Haas, we've just talked about. Aston Martin, we kind of know where that's going. Will Lance Stroll still be there? You'd have to kind of think that he will be at the moment, because that's gone awfully quiet. And then you get to the top teams and they're all locked in for the next year or so. So really the Alpine situation with the contract recognition board in the coming weeks is going to be really interesting as to what happens with Oscar Piastri, and then we'll see where that goes. He could end up with nothing out of this, and I have this gut feeling that that's how it's going to play itself out, and Alex Palau could be in the same position, and it all stems back to the deals that they did with Zach Brown. So let's just wait and see, because it's going to be entertaining, and it sure as heck ain't over yet. Well, it sure is going to be an interesting couple of weeks ahead, I think, for the driver market. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And a couple of weeks ahead, the NTT IndyCar season will have come to a close. 2 rounds remaining this weekend at Portland, and then down to the magic Laguna Seca Raceway in Northern California. Both fantastic venues. Portland, well, it's going to be interesting. The team Penske had a private test there along with several other teams. Just recently, Will Power had a big off there, but he ended up being the quickest car overall. Surprise contender, of course, Joseph Newgarden. Meanwhile, down the other end of the country, the Ganassi team tested at Laguna Seca, and Alex Palou was the quickest there. Dixon only being 5th amongst some of the other cars that were there. So there's a lot to play for in these coming weeks. And we caught up with Jimmie Johnson to give us his views on what's lying ahead.
Race weekend Portland, excited for another shot in the Carvana Honda. I'm going back to a track that I really enjoyed driving at last year. We had a chance to test there last year. Sadly not this, but I just got back from Laguna Seca. I'm feeling good with the car and glad that I got those extra laps and experience heading into a race weekend. So excited for it. Looking forward to being in the Pacific Northwest, such a beautiful area of the country, and I can't wait to get out there and get racing.
It's hard to think now that it was way back on February the 27th that the IndyCar season kicked off, and here we are with only 2 races to go. So what will happen in Portland? There are 7 drivers currently still in contention, but the main contenders really become Will Power, Joseph Newgarden, Scott Dixon, Marcus Ericsson. Then those on the outside looking in will be Alex Palou, Scott McLaughlin and Pato O'Ward. The difference with those last 3 is that they're going to rely on what happens with other people to decide their fate, whereas the first 4, they need to determine their fate. So if we look at it, at the moment, Will Power's leading with 432 points. Newgarden is only 3 points behind, Dixon is only 14 points behind, and Ericsson is only 17 points behind. Bearing in mind there are a lot of points on the table, so you have to finish races. I've said it all year, but you must finish races. If you look back at the form, then Will Power won there in 2019 at Portland, and Dixon, well, he had a big off that year, but dropped the clutch, kept the car going, and ultimately ended up going on to win the championship at Sonoma. So really, the thing at Portland is going to be finish ahead of your competitor. That's the easiest way to work out this championship scenario right now. Finish ahead of those around you. I think the biggest threat to Will Power is going to be his teammate Joseph Newgarden. When you look at it, Newgarden's had a pretty mixed season. He's had 33% win record and he's had 30% lost record as well. So it's been a very mixed bag, but he's still in championship contention and he's a fighter and he'll be there to the end. Penske will stay strong as a team because that's what the way the captain wants it. But at the end of the day, I regard Newgarden as being the biggest threat, then the 2 Ganassi boys. I kind of think that Ericsson's still playing a little bit on the double points that he inherited from the Indy 500 win, and Dixon's clawed his way back. That win at Nashville made a huge difference, but can he do that? They need to qualify stronger, all the Ganassi cars, otherwise they're going to be left out of this equation. But when you look at it, Dixon can hold his head very high this season. He's scored 2 wins, and Ganassi, as a team, have only scored 3. The other one coming, of course, from Ericsson at the Indy 500. Palou yet to actually score a win this season, so maybe that could upset the whole apple cart if someone like Alex Palou takes a win at Portland, and then the ripple in the points battle will really change. So I can't keep stressing it enough. The biggest thing is you must finish this race, and you must finish ahead of your competitor to give yourself a title shot come Laguna Seca. Then we look at those 3 drivers just on the outside but still mathematically in the equation. Alex Palou 43 points behind Will Power, McLaughlin's 54 points behind, and O'Ward is 58 points behind. So they need to turn in at least top 3 positions probably in the race to stay in that magic 50 odd mark points buffer to the championship leader. So there is a lot to play for this weekend. I think qualifying will be very critical to the whole thing. You want a clean run down into that first corner at Portland. We've seen cars go upside down there, we've seen dust, we've seen all sorts of things. So the chase to that first corner and the opening couple of laps need to stay clean. Will tyre strategy and overall strategy come into it? It will depend, because the fall of the yellow may decide some things. But ultimately, I think the start is going to be a very critical part of this race and maybe decide the championship. So it's all shaping up to be another great IndyCar final, that's for sure. And when you look at it, and as I've said in previous shows, for the 20 odd years that I've been covering IndyCar personally and up front with them, this championship comes to the wire every year, and here we are with 2 races to go, 7 drivers in contention for a championship. That is just amazing. It really is. When you consider Formula One, we're probably all saying Max Verstappen's going to win this thing already, and we've still got 8 races to go. So, you know, there's a big difference in that, and what IndyCar do and the way the points margin works with the bonus lap for laps led and the bonus point for qualifying. I think it works. It's a very good formula, and it's providing us with exciting championships, and it's also providing us with multiple drivers that stay in contention from multiple teams. Sure, it's kind of almost ended up a Ganassi slash Penske title race, but at one stage we had different winners at every race and from different teams, and we've seen that. We've seen little teams shine this year. Look at David Malukas recently at Gateway. That was a fantastic performance, but it was backed up by Sato, who came home 5th. So Dale Coyne brought 2 cars home in the top 5, and that was very, very significant. So I just think it's been great. Portland will be a decider. Then Laguna will be the real decider, that's for sure. And that battle heats up too in Indy Lights, where we'll see New Zealander Hunter McElrea back out there. The battle in the Indy Lights Championship is for second, because Linus Longquist, boy, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? He's well out in front, but that battle for second is still between Stingray Robb, Matt Brabham and Hunter McElrea. And McElrea really needs to just be consistent this weekend and score those points and let the others fall off the wayside before they too head to Laguna. And of course, we should never forget the boys in F2000, Billy Fraser and Jacob Douglas, both doing fine jobs. They've had mixed seasons. Douglas, though, showing some great performances recently. Been really proud of what I've seen from him. This is a young kid that's really developing his first year in US F2000, and Billy, of course, in his second year, and we're seeing the results of a second year program from him as well. So I think all of that looks great. It really does. There's a lot of talent in North America from New Zealand at the moment, and we should all be very, very proud of that. And then before we go, we can't ignore Formula One. So what happened last week? Well, Max drove from the back to the front. So there we go. That was a Red Bull dominated race at Spa. Was it a good race? Well, yeah, it was. It had its moments. Obviously, the opening lap with Alonso and Hamilton. I really think that Hamilton just didn't see Alonso, and Alonso's not one of those drivers that's going to give way to you. He's not going to yield, and Lewis should have been smart enough to know that. So I kind of lay some of that blame towards Lewis, but at the end of the day, racing incident really. They're both hard charges opening lap. That's just the way it goes. Disappointment from Ferrari. They had no outright pace to really match the Red Bulls. Carlos drove a fantastic race early on, did everything that they needed to do, but really they just couldn't manage the straight line speed that Red Bull had over them. So we go to Zandvoort this weekend. Well, it's the home of Max, so going to be a lot of orange flags there and a lot of orange t-shirts, that's for sure. Will he win there? I think he might. The thing to watch out for is these new artificial gravel traps that have appeared on the scene, and the FIA are trialling those, so they'll look like a real sand trap and everything, but they're not. So that could be quite an interesting thing to take note of this weekend if you happen to be watching Formula One from Zandvoort. There's so much happening around motorsport, and of course in New Zealand the South Island Endurance Series kicks off, and that'll be well underway by the time this podcast goes to air. So it's just fantastic that we have such high quality cars that make up this endurance series, both in the North Island and South Island in this country. It's fantastic, but it needs more media push. I can't stress that enough. It's not because I work in the media, but it needs more media push. You have all of these cars, these great drivers, and very little media coverage, and I think that's a very sad state of affairs. So to the rest of the media out there, do your job and get on there and publicise this thing, because this is New Zealand motorsport and we've got New Zealanders on a world stage. And speaking of world stage, it's only weeks away now to the WRC event in New Zealand, and again showcasing New Zealand talent on gravel roads. And I know, talking to just Robbie Stokes last night, member of the Academy this year, who'll be competing in the New Zealand Rally Championship categories during the WRC event. This is a massive event for those guys. They get to showcase their talent in front of world rallying elite, and they compete on harder and longer stages than they do all season. So it's a great value benefit to the local competitor, as well as hosting a New Zealand event. And of course, SuperCar at Pukekohe. For the final time, Pukekohe will see V8 Supercars there. And I remember as a producer way back in 2002, I'm going to say, producing the first return to Pukekohe event for Television New Zealand back then, and how we transformed Pukekohe into looking like a track that it hadn't always looked like. And that was always my goal, was to make Pukekohe look different. And I'm still very proud of what we did back then and the years that we did that and the awards that we picked up for our coverage there. So it's going to be kind of sad to see finally the end of an era at Pukekohe, but boy, it will go out with a bang. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And many of this year's Elite Motorsport Academy drivers will be seen there. So get out there and support those young kids. We're supporting them. If you're seeing this and you see those young kids out there, just give them a hi and a welcome and tell them how good they're doing, because as a 16-year-old, this is not an easy sport to be in, and they're doing a great job. And then just before I go, I got a little bit of a sort of you might call it a rant to talk about, and the fact that the name Race Control, now there seems to be a bit of an issue in the media circles at the moment. It's come back to me, the fact that Race Control, there are other race control things out there. I'd like to stress, Race Control magazine was created 7 years ago with my prime interest in covering IndyCar. Race Control magazine still exists. You can still buy it on Zinio as back issues. It will come back eventually, but at the moment the podcast has been our main focus, and with the downturn over COVID and things like that, it didn't enable us to travel. So we parked Race Control magazine, but Race Control magazine is effectively the sponsor of this podcast, Racing World. So for anyone who's thinking that Race Control is copying other ideas from other media that are out there, that's untrue. We were there first, and I'd like to stress that, and I like to stress that quite highly, because that was a concept that I came up with for the magazine. I'm not going to go on about it, but a number of people have told me that I'm ripping off someone else's idea, and I'd just like to say we were there first. But anyway, that's enough of that. Next week we'll look back at Zandvoort as the teams then head to Monza for another Formula One Grand Prix, and of course we'll be talking IndyCar and the outcome of what could be the decider in the NTT IndyCar Championship for 2022. Until then, stay safe, enjoy, subscribe, share, comment, and we love having you watching Racing World.